I've sat across from thousands of people over the decades, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the truth doesn't just set you free. It usually tears a hole through everything you've built on a foundation of lies first. We like to think we can manage a secret, that we can tuck it away in a dark corner of our minds and live our lives as if it isn't breathing, eating, and growing right alongside us. But secrets are parasitic. They require energy to maintain, and eventually that energy runs out. When I first met Sarah, she looked like the picture of composure. But I've done this long enough to recognize the vibration of someone who is holding on to a live wire. She was sitting in my dressing room before the camera started rolling, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white, and she gave me that practice smile, the one people use when they're trying to convince themselves more than they're trying to convince me. I looked her in the eyes, and I didn't see a villain, and I didn't see a victim. I saw someone who was exhausted from the weight of a facade that was about to crumble under its own gravity. The title of the episode was supposed to be about her husband's uncontrollable rage. But I knew within 5 minutes of reading the file that we weren't there to talk about Mark's temper. We were there because Mark was reacting to a ghost he couldn't see, and Sarah was the one holding the lantern. See, there is no reality, only perception, and for 15 years, Sarah had curated a perception of a perfect suburban life. She was the PTA president, the woman who organized the bake sales, the mother who never had a hair out of place. She wore the hero label like a suit of armor, but armor is heavy and it doesn't breathe. The central problem wasn't the anger in their home. The problem was the massive, gaping void of honesty that had been hollowed out in the center of their marriage. Sarah had been hiding a truth so profound, so devastating, that it had effectively turned her entire existence into a performance. And the thing about performances is that they eventually have to end. When I walk onto that stage, I'm not just looking for facts, I'm looking for the why. Why does a person choose to live a lie for over a decade? Why do they choose the slow burn of anxiety over the sharp pain of a confession? I've seen this pattern 1,000 times. It starts small. It starts with a little bit of image management. You don't want people to think you're struggling, so you round the edges off the truth. Then you start lying to your spouse because you don't want to deal with the conflict. Then you start lying to yourself because the person in the mirror has become a stranger. Sarah was at the end of that road. She had reached a point where her perfect life was a house of cards and a stiff breeze was about to blow through the studio. Mark, her husband, was a different story. He sat on the edge of the stage chair, leaning forward, his face flushed with a mixture of confusion and resentment. He had been labeled the agitator. The producer's notes described him as volatile, defensive, and prone to outburst. But when I looked at him, I didn't see a man who was inherently angry. I saw a man who was being gaslit by his own life. He knew something was wrong. He could feel the disconnect, the coldness, the inconsistency in their finances and their schedule. But every time he asked a question, Sarah would turn it back on him. She'd tell him he was being paranoid, that he was stressed from work, that he was seeing things that weren't there. That is a special kind of psychological torture, and it's no wonder he was exploding. If you tell a man the sky is green long enough while he's looking at the blue, eventually he's going to start shouting at the sky. My job in those first few minutes is to establish the ground truth. I have to strip away the labels and the stories they've told their neighbors, their parents, and even their children. I told Sarah, right there in front of the audience, that we weren't going to talk about Mark's yelling for a while. I told her we were going to talk about what was happening in the quiet moments. I watched her face. That's where the story is not in the words, but in the micro expressions, the way her eyes darted to the exit, the way she smoothed her skirt. She was terrified. She was terrified because for the first time in 15 years, she was in a room with someone who didn't buy the hero act. I told her, Sarah, you've spent a lot of time making sure everyone else is okay, but you've left yourself behind in the process. And in doing so, you've created a vacuum that is sucking the life out of this family. She tried to pivot. She was good at it. She started talking about the kids, about how hard she worked, about how Mark's episodes were traumatizing the household. It was a classic diversion tactic. It's what I call blame shifting to the loudest person. Because Mark was the one yelling, it was easy to point at him and say, he's the problem. It's a very convenient smokescreen. But I wasn't there to talk about the smoke. I was there to find the fire. I asked her a very simple question. What is the one thing you are most afraid of Mark finding out today? The silence that followed that question was heavy. It wasn't just a pause, it was a physical weight. The audience felt it. Mark felt it. Sarah's breathing changed, became shallow, rapid. She didn't look at Mark. She didn't look at me. She looked at the floor. That's the moment the mask starts to crack. That's the moment where the hero realizes that the stage lights are very bright and there's nowhere left to hide. I've seen people do many things in that moment. Some get up and walk off. Some get angry and lash out at me. Some just shut down. But Sarah did something else. She took a deep breath, and for a split second, I saw the real woman underneath the PTA president. I saw a woman who was drowning. To understand how Sarah got to this point, you have to look at the backstory. You have to look at the mothers and fathers of the situation. We don't just wake up one day and decide to become master manipulators of our own reality. We are taught these patterns. Sarah grew up in a household where appearance was everything. Her father was a prominent figure in their small town, and her mother was the ultimate gatekeeper of the family's reputation. If there was a problem, alcoholism, debt, infidelity, it was swept under the rug, and the rug was stapled to the floor. You didn't talk about feelings, you talked about achievements. You didn't ask for help. You put on a clean shirt and went to church. Sarah learned very early that being good was the only way to be safe. This is what I call a life script. Sarah was following a script that was written for her before she could even walk. The script said, you are responsible for the emotional temperature of the room. If someone is unhappy, it's your fault. If the family looks bad, you have failed. Imagine carrying that burden for 40 years. It's an impossible standard. When she married Mark, she brought that script with her. Mark was a guy who wore his heart on his sleeve. He was honest, sometimes to a fault. In the beginning, that was what she loved about him. He was the real to her rehearsed. But as the pressures of life built up mortgages, kids, career setbacks, the script began to demand more and more of her. The escalation didn't happen overnight. It was a series of small choices that compounded over time. It started with a credit card she didn't tell him about. She wanted to buy things for the kids that they couldn't quite afford because she didn't want them to feel less than their peers. She told herself she'd pay it off with her part-time job money. But then the interest built up, so she got another card to pay off the first one, then a third. It's a common story, but it's never just about the money. It's about the shame. The money was just the tangible symptom of a psychological disease. She felt like a failure because she couldn't maintain the perfect life on a middle-class budget. Instead of saying, Mark, we're in trouble, she said, I'll fix it. And that I'll fix it became the mantra that led her into a dark, lonely woods. By the time they reached my stage, the I'll fix it had grown into a monster. She wasn't just hiding credit cards anymore. She was hiding the fact that their house was in foreclosure. She was hiding the fact that she had drained their eldest daughter's college fund to keep the lights on and the neighbors from noticing. She was hiding the fact that she had been intercepting the mail for 2 years. Think about the logistics of that. Every single day, She had to make sure she was the first one to the mailbox. She had to manage the phone calls from creditors, the notices from the bank, all while planning the neighborhood block party. It's a full-time job in deception. And the more she hid, the more Mark felt the walls closing in. He knew the money was tight, but Sarah told him he was bad with math and worrying for nothing. She made him feel like he was losing his mind. That's the escalation of the conflict, the move from simple secrecy to active gaslighting. Imagine the mental gymnastics you have to perform every single morning just to keep your feet on the floor when you know the floor is rotting beneath you. Sarah wasn't just tired, she was psychologically emaciated. Every time the phone rang, her heart didn't just skip a beat, it felt like it was trying to leap out of her chest and run for the door. When you live a lie of that magnitude, your central nervous system stays in a constant state of high alert. You're in a permanent fight or flight mode, but the enemy isn't outside the gates. The enemy's the person you see in the mirror. I looked at her sitting there, clutching her purse like it was a life preserver, and I knew she was reaching her breaking point. People don't come to my show because things are going well. They come because they've run out of track. They've reached the end of their own resources, and they're hoping, praying, really, that someone will finally call their bluff so they can stop the charade. I turned my attention back to Mark. He was vibrating with a nervous energy that I see in men who have been told they're crazy for years. He had this look of desperate validation in his eyes. He started telling me about the incidents. He talked about the time he found a stack of unopened mail hidden in the spare tire well of Sarah's car. When he confronted her, she told him she'd just forgotten to bring it in and that it was mostly junk anyway. He talked about the time their power was shut off for 3 hours on a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah told him it was a transformer blowing down the street and that she'd already called the utility company. He wanted to believe her. That's the thing people don't realize about betrayal in a marriage. The partner who is being lied to often becomes an unwitting co-conspirator in the deception because the alternative is too painful to face. Mark didn't want to believe his wife was a liar. He didn't want to believe their financial house was on fire. So he accepted the transformer story, even though none of the neighbors lost power. But his gut knew, his subconscious was screaming at him that something was wrong and that internal conflict was manifesting as the uncontrollable rage Sarah had complained about. I asked Mark, when you're shouting at her, what are you actually shouting at? He paused, he looked at the floor, then at the audience, then back at me. I'm shouting because I feel like I'm disappearing, he said, his voice cracking. I feel like I'm living in a movie and I'm the only one who hasn't read the script. I know what I see, but she tells me I'm not seeing it. I feel like I'm losing my grip on reality. That right there is the definition of gaslighting. It's not just lying, it's the systematic dismantling of another person's perception of the truth. And Sarah was a master at it, not because she was malicious, but because she was terrified. She thought if she admitted the truth, she would lose everything. She thought her value was tied to the perfect wife image, and if that image broke, she would be worthless. I've always said that you can't change what you don't acknowledge. Sarah was acknowledging nothing. She was still in management mode. She started explaining to the audience that Mark was exaggerating the male situation. She said he was hyper-focused on small things. I stopped her right there. I told her, Sarah, let's stop the spin. We aren't in a PTA meeting. We aren't at the neighborhood barbecue. We are in a room full of people who are looking for the truth. And I'm the one holding the flashlight. You didn't hide the mail because you were forgetful. You hid it because it contained a notice of default on your mortgage. Am I right? The air left the room. You could hear a pin drop. Mark's head whipped around to look at her. He didn't know. He suspected things were bad, but he didn't know they were default bad. Sarah's face went from pale to a ghostly white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. This is the escalation meeting the confrontation. This is the moment where the lie becomes too big for the room. I didn't say it to be cruel. I said it because until the ground truth is on the table, we're just moving furniture around in a burning house. I had the documents. My team had done the legwork. We knew about the second mortgage she'd forged his signature on. We knew about the empty savings accounts. We knew the depth of the hole she had dug. Is it true? Mark asked. It was barely a whisper. He wasn't yelling now. The rage had been replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Sarah looked at me, her eyes pleading for a way out, for a way to soften the blow. But there is no soft way to tell your husband you've gambled away your children's future on the altar of keeping up appearances. I didn't give her an out. I stayed silent, letting the question hang in the air. This is a technique I use to force a breakthrough. If I talk, I'm the one doing the work. She had to do the work. She had to own the words. Finally, she nodded. A small, jerky movement of the head. Then the dam broke. I just wanted everyone to be happy, she sobbed. I just didn't want you to worry. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I just worked harder, if I just found a way to get one more loan, I could put it all back before you ever knew. I did it for us. That's a classic line. I did it for us. I hear it from white-collar criminals. I hear it from unfaithful spouses. And I hear it from people like Sarah. It's the ultimate self-delusion. You don't betray your partner for them. You do it for yourself to avoid the discomfort of their disappointment, to avoid the shame of your own failure. I told her, Sarah, don't you dare put this on us. You didn't do this for Mark. You did this to protect the version of yourself you wanted him to see. You traded your integrity for a facade, and you traded his sanity for your comfort. That's not love. That's a hostage situation. It sounds harsh, I know, but sometimes you have to perform surgery to save the patient. Sarah had been living in a dream world, and the only way to get her back to reality was to give her a wake-up call that she couldn't ignore. I turned to Mark. He was sitting there, his hands over his face, shaking his head. He wasn't angry anymore. He was grieving. He was grieving the marriage he thought he had. He was grieving the trust that had just been incinerated in front of a national audience. Mark, I said, you've spent 2 years thinking you were the problem. You thought your temper was the reason your marriage was failing. Now you know the temper was a symptom of a deeper infection. How does it feel to finally see the monster you've been fighting? He looked up and his eyes were red. It feels like I've been hit by a train, he said, but at least I know why I'm bleeding now. That's the beginning of the breakthrough. It's painful, it's messy, and it's ugly, but it's honest, and honesty is the only foundation you can build anything on. We spent the next hour peeling back the layers of the backstory I mentioned earlier. We talked about her parents' obsession with status. We talked about how Sarah felt like she was performing from the time she was 5 years old. We talked about the internal working model. She had developed the belief that she was only lovable if she was perfect. If she wasn't the hero, she was nothing. I told her, you've been a professional pleaser your whole life, Sarah, but look at the wreckage. You haven't pleased Mark. You haven't pleased your kids. You certainly haven't pleased yourself. You've created a theater of the absurd, and you're the only one who forgot it was a play. The psychological toll of what she had done wasn't just on the finances, it was on her identity. Who is Sarah if she isn't the woman with the perfect house and the perfect life? She didn't know she had spent so much time being who she thought everyone wanted her to be that the real Sarah had withered away. I saw her realize that in real time. It's a terrifying moment when someone realizes they are a stranger to themselves. The confrontation didn't stop there. I had to address the gaslighting. I told her, When you told Mark he was imagining things, when you told him he was stressed and unstable because he was questioning your lies, you were committing psychological domestic violence. You were breaking his mind to save your face. Do you understand the gravity of that? She was crying harder now, the kind of deep, gut-wrenching sobs that come from a place of genuine realization. I'm so sorry, she kept saying. I'm so sorry. But sorry is a word that is often used as a Band-Aid for a gunshot wound. I told her that sorry doesn't pay the mortgage and sorry doesn't restore a broken mind. We needed a plan. We needed to see if there was anything left of this marriage to save, or if the fire had burned it all down to the ash. I looked at the clock. We were halfway through the session, and the tension in the room was palpable. The audience was silent, moved by the raw destruction of a family's myth. This wasn't a show anymore. This was a funeral for a lie. And in the middle of that funeral, I saw the first spark of something new. Mark reached out not to hold her hand, not yet, but he reached out and put a tissue on the arm of her chair. It was a small gesture, but in the world of psychology, it was a seismic shift. It meant he was still in the room. He hadn't walked away. Not yet. That tissue on the armrest was a white flag in a war that had been raging in silence for years. It didn't mean he'd forgiven her. Forgiveness doesn't come that fast, and if it does, it usually isn't real. It meant he was willing to stay in the wreckage a little longer to see if anything could be salvaged. I've seen men walk out the moment the word foreclosure hits the air. I've seen women collapse into a catatonic state when their double life is exposed. But Mark and Sarah were sitting in the middle of a psychological earthquake, and they were both still in their seats. That tells me there's a flicker of a we left, even if the I in both of them is shattered. I leaned in, and I didn't raise my voice. When the truth is this loud, you have to speak softly to be heard. I told Sarah, you think you were protecting your family, but let's look at the cost of the secret. You weren't just spending money you didn't have. You were spending your children's sense of security. You were spending Mark's peace of mind. You were spending your own soul, one lie at a time. And for what? To make sure the lady 3 doors down thought you had a nice car? To make sure your mother didn't have a reason to look down her nose at you during Thanksgiving? You traded your family's future for a ghost. You traded the real for the ideal, and the ideal is a cold, lonely place to live. I wanted her to feel the weight of it, not to shame her, but to wake her up. Shame is a useless emotion. It just makes you want to hide more. Guilt, however, can be a motivator. Guilt says, I did something bad and I need to fix it. Sarah had been drowning in shame, which is why she kept lying. She felt like she was bad, so she had to hide the bad person behind the hero mask. I had to shift her from shame to guilt, and then from guilt to responsibility. I asked her, Sarah, when you were forging Mark's name on those loan documents, what was the conversation you were having with yourself? Walk me through the internal dialogue of a woman who is signing her husband's life away without his knowledge. She looked haunted. I told myself I'd pay it back before he saw the statement. She said, her voice small and brittle. I told myself that if he knew how much debt I'd gotten us into, he'd leave me. And I couldn't lose him. I couldn't let the kids see us fail. I'd tell myself just one more month, just one more miracle. I was waiting for a miracle that was never going to come. Every time I signed his name, I felt a piece of me die. I hated myself. I'd look at him at the dinner table and I'd feel like a monster. But then he'd get frustrated about the money and he'd start yelling. And it was almost a relief. Because if he was the angry one, then I could be the victim. I could tell myself that I was the one holding it all together while he was falling apart. That is a profound psychological insight, and it's one of the most toxic dynamics I see. It's called reactive provocation. She was subconsciously provoking his anger so she didn't have to face her own betrayal. If he was the problem, then her secrets were just self-defense. I turned to Mark. Do you hear that, Mark? Your anger was her hiding place. Every time you lost your cool, you gave her a place to duck and cover. You were playing a role in her play, and you didn't even know you'd been cast as the villain. Mark's face was a map of realization. He was nodding slowly, the pieces of the last 2 years finally clicking into place. I felt like I was going crazy, he said. I would ask about the savings account, and she'd tell me I was being controlling. She'd say, why don't you trust me? After everything I do for this family, you're going to grill me over a few $100s? It made me feel like a jerk. It made me feel like I was the one who was broken. I'd end up apologizing to her for asking questions about our own money. This is the confrontation phase in its purest form, where the gaslighting is exposed and the victim's reality is restored. I told Mark you weren't going crazy. You were being gaslit. Your internal warning system was working perfectly. You smelled smoke because there was a fire. But every time you pointed at the smoke, she told you it was just fog. That does a number on a person's brain. It makes you stop trusting your own senses. It makes you feel untethered from the world. Today, the fog is gone. It's all fire now, but at least you know where the exits are. We had to talk about the children. They had 2 teenagers at home who had been living in this pressure cooker. I've said it 1,000,000 times, kids would rather be from a broken home than live in one. They aren't stupid. They might not have known about the second mortgage or the intercepted mail, but they felt the vibration of the house. They felt the tension between their parents. They saw the hero mom and the angry dad, and they were likely internalizing those roles themselves. I asked Sarah, what are you teaching your daughter about what it means to be a woman? Are you teaching her that her worth is tied to her bank account and her ability to keep up appearances? Are you teaching her that it's okay to lie to the person you love as long as you look good on social media? Sarah broke down then, truly broke down. The hero was gone. The PTA president was gone. There was just a middle-aged woman sitting on a stage realizing she had paved a road to hell with her good intentions. This was the breakthrough I was looking for. Not the polite crying of someone who got caught, but the soul-shattering grief of someone who finally sees the damage they've done. I let her cry. You can't rush a breakthrough. You have to let the person sit in the discomfort of their own truth for a while. If you comfort them too soon, you're just helping them build a new mask. I waited until her breathing leveled out, and then I said, so, what's the ground truth now, Sarah? No more spin. No more I did it for them. Just the raw, honest truth. Who are you and what have you done? She looked at Mark, and for the first time that day, she didn't look away. I am a liar, she said, her voice shaking but clear, and I am a thief. I stole our security, and I stole your trust. I made you feel like you were losing your mind to protect my own pride. I have ruined us financially, and I have betrayed the man who has done nothing but work for me and our kids. That is the truth. The audience was silent. Mark was silent. I looked at him and said, Mark, you just heard the most honest thing this woman has said to you in 15 years. It's ugly, it's devastating, and it's a lot to process. But for the first time in your marriage, you're both standing on the same ground. It's scorched earth, but it's solid. The question is, can you build something on scorched earth, or is the soil too toxic? This is the pivot toward the outcome. We aren't there yet, but we're at the crossroads. I spent the next part of our session breaking down the logistics of the recovery. I told them I was going to provide them with a doctor, fill path to recovery resources, financial counseling, intensive individual therapy for Sarah to deal with her deep-seated need for approval, and marriage counseling if they both decided they wanted to try and fix the we. But I made it clear Sarah had to earn her way back into this marriage. Trust isn't a gift, it's a wage. It has to be earned over time with consistent, transparent behavior. Sarah, I said, from this moment on, your life is an open book. You don't get to have a password on your phone that Mark doesn't know. You don't get to check the mail alone. You don't get to make a purchase for a pack of gum without showing a receipt. Not because Mark is a warden, but because you are an addict. You are addicted to the high of the lie, the rush of getting away with it, and the safety of the secret. To break that addiction, you have to live in the light even when it's blinding. I turned back to the backstory to explain why this was so vital. I told them about the generational curse. Sarah's mother had done the same thing, just on a smaller scale. She'd hidden her husband's drinking and her own shopping habits to maintain the family's status. Sarah was just the next iteration of that pattern, but she'd upgraded the deception for the digital age. If she didn't break this cycle now, her children would carry it into their own marriages. They would become performers or gaslighters or angry reactors because that was the only internal working model they'd ever seen. You have a chance here, Sarah, I told her. You have a chance to be the one who stops the cycle. You have a chance to show your kids that being real is a hell of a lot more important than being perfect, but it's going to hurt. It's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done because you're going to have to let people see you fail. You're going to have to walk into that neighborhood and let them know you're losing the house. You're going to have to tell your mother the truth. You're going to have to stand in the middle of your own wreckage and not run away. I looked at Mark, and you, Mark, you have to decide if you can live with a real woman who is flawed and broken, or if you'd rather go find another ideal that might just be another lie. You have to decide if the woman behind the mask is worth the work it's going to take to heal the man who was tortured by the mask. He didn't answer right away. He couldn't. He was still reeling from the foreclosure bomb, but he didn't pull his hand away when she reached out and touched his arm. He didn't move toward her, but he didn't flinch. In the world of high conflict relationships, not flinching is a huge step forward. It means the threat response is starting to settle. It means the agitator is starting to find his center again. I looked at the two of them and I realized we were at the critical juncture. That's the point in any crisis where you either start to climb out of the hole or you just start digging a deeper one. Sarah was finally being honest, but honesty is just the entry fee for a better life. It's not the whole game. I told her, you've spent 15 years building a complex, multi-layered lie. You can't expect to build a truth in 15 minutes. You've got to be prepared for the fact that Mark might look at you tomorrow and decide he's done. And he has every right to do that. You've essentially stolen 15 years of his life by giving him a version of you that didn't exist. I saw her nod, and there was a different kind of look in her eye now, a look of sobriety. Not from a substance, but from the intoxicating delusion she'd been living in for over a decade. I turned to the audience and I said, you see what's happening here? This isn't just a marriage in trouble. This is a collision between reality and a fantasy that went on for far too long. I've seen this before. People who get so caught up in the projection of their lives that they forget they're the ones actually living it. They become spectators to their own destruction, watching the flames from the front row while holding a bucket of gasoline. Sarah was a spectator to her own house burning down while she was inside it, trying to figure out which curtains would look best for the neighbors to see through the windows. It's a special kind of madness that comes from the approval addiction. I had to address the children one more time because that's the real legacy of the lie. I asked Sarah, if your kids were sitting here today, what would they say about the mom they know versus the mom we're seeing now? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, her composure finally gone for good. They'd say they don't know who I am. They'd say they thought I was perfect, but now they're going to think I'm a criminal. I stopped her right there. I leaned forward, making sure she was looking me in the eye. No, I said. They're going to think you're human, and that's the greatest gift you could ever give them. You've been teaching them that they have to be perfect to be loved. You've been teaching them that failure is a death sentence that must be hidden at all cost. By letting them see you fall, and then letting them see you do the hard work of getting back up, you're finally teaching them how to live in the real world. We talked about the financial restitution, and the cold, hard numbers wasn't going to be pretty. They were likely going to lose the house. The credit cards, the forged signatures, the drained savings, it was a mountain of debt that couldn't be wished away. They were going to have to move into a smaller place, maybe a 2-bedroom apartment. Sarah was going to have to get a full-time job, not a side hustle for status or a social club position, but a real grimy job to help pay back the debts. Mark was going to have to manage every penny for a while. I told them transparency isn't just about the money, it's about the soul. If you hide a $5 bill tomorrow, Sarah, you might as well hide 50,000, because the act of hiding is the poison. The amount is just the dosage. Mark finally spoke up again. He looked at Sarah, not with the fire of rage, but with a weary kind of sadness that was almost harder to watch. I don't know if I can do this, Phil, he said. I want to. I love her, or I love the woman I thought she was. But every time I look at her now, I see the mail in the spare tire. I see the forged signature on the second mortgage. I hear the lies she told me while we were lying in bed at night, looking me in the eye and telling me we were fine. How do I ever unsee that? How do I ever go to sleep without wondering what she's doing when I'm not looking? I told him the truth because I don't believe in sugarcoating a bitter pill. You don't unsee it, Mark. You can't. It's a part of your story now, etched into the foundation. You don't get to go back to the way it was. That marriage is dead. It's gone. It was based on a lie, so in a very real sense, it was never really there to begin with. The question isn't, how do we get back to normal? The question is, do you want to start a brand new marriage with this woman knowing everything you know now? You're starting from below zero. You're starting with a massive deficit of trust and a lot of shared trauma. And if you decide to stay, you're deciding to be a part of a long, painful reconstruction project. There are no shortcuts. There are no fast-forward buttons on the remote control of life. I saw the weight of that reality settle on him. It's a heavy thing to realize that your life as you knew it is over, even if you're still standing in the middle of it. But I also saw something else. I saw him take a long, deep breath and actually look at his wife, not the hero mom, not the villain who lied to him, but the woman, the flawed, broken, terrified woman who was finally, for the first time, not trying to perform for him or the world. She was just there. I moved into the final phase of our session, which is what I call the outcome. Now, in some cases, the outcome is a clean break. Sometimes the damage is too deep, the betrayal too systemic, and the best thing for everyone, including the children, is to walk away and start fresh separately. I've recommended that many times when I don't see any internal motivation for change, but with Mark and Sarah, I saw a sliver of hope. Not because they were in love in the traditional sense, but because they were both finally in truth. Truth is a powerful glue if you use it right. I told them I'm going to provide the resources for the Dr. Phil Aftercare program. We're going to get you a forensic accountant to look at the numbers and see if there's any way to salvage your credit. We're going to get Sarah into an intensive outpatient program for her approval addiction and the deep-seated internal working model she got from her parents. And we're going to get you both into a room with a specialist who can help you navigate the post-traumatic stress of this betrayal. But the work doesn't happen on this stage. The work happens when the cameras are off and the lights are down. It happens at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. when you want to lie about a small bill, but you choose to tell the truth instead. It happens when you want to scream at her for what she did, but you choose to talk about your fear of the future instead. I looked at Sarah and I gave her the final philism she needed to carry home. You've been faking it until you make it for 15 years, Sarah. You've been running a marathon on a treadmill that's going nowhere. How's that working for you? She smiled a little, a sad, honest smile that didn't reach for perfection. It's not, she said. It's been killing me since the day it started. I nodded. Then stop. Just stop. Be the woman who failed. Be the woman who made a mess. Because that woman is real. And a real mess is a hell of a lot better than a perfect lie every single day of the week. You can't clean up a mess you won't admit you made. The session ended not with a hug or a dramatic reconciliation, but with a handshake and a heavy sense of purpose. Mark stood up and Sarah stood up. They looked at each other and there was a vast distance between them, but the fog had completely lifted. They walked off the stage, and for the first time in 2 years, they were walking toward the same reality. They weren't happy, but they were honest. And in my book, that's a win.